It is your Tuesday daily delivery. I am Michael Rand. Happy to be back for another day. Hope you guys are having a terrific day out there today. Tremendous show coming up. Cassidy Hettesheimer from the Star Tribune joins me in a little bit. High school sports on the brain. She just covered a good portion of the girls hockey state tournaments. We'll talk about that. She recently completed a project on high school sports rivalries. We'll get into that. And she has covered a good number of Minnesota Frost games this season. We will catch up on that team, which has barely had any home games in the last month and won't have any more for the next month, in part because of all the high school tournaments at XL Energy Center. So we'll get into all of that with Cassidy here in just a little bit. Twins thought towards the end of the show on Chris Paddack. Wild injury update that doesn't sound promising in a moment here. First, though, what I miss. Have to start with the Timberwolves. Didn't imagine I might, based on where things were at in last night's game going into the fourth quarter. Early in the fourth quarter, Timberwolves were down 106-82 against Oklahoma City, and it was right around the time that we were starting to do bedtimes for the kids. I was like, this game is over. Don't need to pay attention to this anymore. Maybe it'll be a footnote on Tuesday's show, because Wednesday I'll have Chris Hine on with me, Timberwolves beat writer. Was fully expecting to kind of talk to him about the tough schedule, losses coming out of the break, things like that. Instead, I'm here to talk about one of the greatest comebacks in franchise history. Down 24 early in the fourth quarter. They were down 25 at one point in the third quarter. They were still down 16 with a little less than 4 minutes to play. Anthony Edwards' calf was barking at him. He wasn't in the game. Just kind of looks like play out the string, maybe try to make it close, throw a scare into Oklahoma City if you can, get it down to 11, 9. Next thing you know, it's a one-possession game. Next thing you know, Jaden McDaniels is getting to the line for an and one, tying the game, sending it to overtime. I think I saw a stat, the Wolves were like 22 of 22 from the free throw line in the fourth quarter and overtime. They make some huge plays down the stretch. Edwards comes back in, even though his calf is still barking at him. He blocks Shai Gilgeous-Alexander's layup attempt in the closing moments. They get the ball back. Nickeil Alexander-Walker makes some clinching free throws. They stop Oklahoma City one more time. 131-128, a comeback victory for the ages. Let's hear from Anthony Edwards post-game.
I don't know. I'm on the bench just watching the game like, we got another stop. And I think, shout out to Finchy, man. He made a great adjustment as far as just going to blitz Shai. Because that's what they did to me all night. So they got a taste of their own medicine, and they was making shots all night, and then somehow in the fourth quarter they just went cold. They couldn't hit anything, and Jaden and Nas and TJ, the boys start playing, and it was just, at that point it was just like we had the momentum. The best players couldn't get nothing because we was trapping them at half court, so he had to get off the ball and they had to make plays for themselves, and it worked out for us. Now that was crazy. I'm not gonna lie. Because when I was in the game, I didn't even realize it was only a 12-point game. I wasn't locked in on that. I'm thinking we down 20. I'm in the game. When I check out the game, I'm like, we only down 12? And we just start making the run. I'm like, oh, my God. And then it was like a minute left. I think we was down like 8. Not with a minute left, but like, some change, minute and some change. I'm like, hey, this is crazy. Yeah, that was crazy. Then Jaden got the N1. I'm like, all right, yeah, we're going to overtime.
So to me, a couple things in particular stand out about this game. Number one, aside from just the amazing comeback, is the continued ascent of Jaden McDaniels. You heard Ant talking about him a little bit there. 27 points, 10 rebounds, 4 assists, 2 steals. When did Jaden McDaniels morph into Scottie Pippen light? Because that's what he reminds me of when he's at his best. Slashing, playing great defense on the wing, versatile, a good to great second fiddle to Anthony Edwards. Again, nothing to take nothing away from Scottie Pippen, who is a Hall of Famer in his own right. And again, not saying Jaden McDaniels is at that level yet, but that is what he's been playing like stylistically to me in the last dozen or so games. He has been elevating his offensive game. He has been taking off to the point where, yeah, you still don't want him taking all the threes. He's not a great shooter, but 9 of 16 from the field without a single three-point attempt last night. 9 of 9 from the free throw line. That is a great Jaden McDaniels game. He has been terrific. He has been really leading the charge without Dante DiVincenzo, without Julius Randle. They haven't had Gobert since the All-Star break, things like that. They've been getting by without it, and they've been getting contributions from the young guys, particularly Terrence Shannon Jr. He has been the most consistent of the young helpers, had 17 points and 10 rebounds off the bench in 29 minutes. He looks like a keeper. Now, Rob Dillingham has been all over the map, but he was good. A plus 12 in this game, 12 points. I'm sorry, a plus 19, 12 points, 4 rebounds, 5 assists. They were leading the charge late in this game. Ant was only 5 of 15. Naz Reid is only 7 of 21. The Wolves shot 9 of 32 from three-point range, just 28%, and they still managed to get 131 points in this game. Part of it, 11 offensive rebounds. Part of it, like I said, all those made free throws, 34 of 39 for the game, including all of those consecutive makes late. So contributions up and down, that's part of it. The second thing this tells me is, I'm not trying not to get ahead of myself, but the Wolves right now, 32-27. We don't know where they're going to finish up. They've got this game against LA and then a month of very winnable games. If they can make some hay during that time, get themselves into the top 6, which I think is very possible for them to do down the stretch. If they can get themselves in the top 6, not have to do a play-in round, I don't think they should be afraid of anybody in the playoffs. And that's not to say they are going to win the West. That's not to say they're even going to win a round. That is to say, if and when they get into the playoffs, the actual 1-8 playoffs, you look at Oklahoma City, far and away the best team in the West. Yeah, the Wolves, though, have just beaten them twice, once going into the break and now once coming out of the break. And the game at Target Center the other night, the first half of this back-to-back, they were up 5 with like 4 minutes to play. Like, they were in that game. They had a chance to win that game. They just didn't get it done late. So opportunities there for the Wolves against Oklahoma City. They're 0-2 against Memphis, but they play Memphis tough. The Clippers, Denver, they're 2-0 against Denver. The Lakers, I wouldn't mind that matchup, even with LeBron and Luka. I think you've got some opportunities there. They're thin. They don't really have a lot of big guys inside. They're not going to rim protect, things like that. So there you go. I think if you look at it objectively, the Wolves shouldn't be afraid of anybody in the postseason. That is my takeaway after watching them enough this year, that if they can get in, if they can play well enough in this winnable stretch coming up, that I think they have to like their chances in the postseason. The news for the Wild, not as good. They got like some marginal good news when they found out Ryan Hartman's suspension has been reduced from 10 games to 8 games. He's already missed 4, so he'll have 4 more, and then he can come back on March 4th. However, if you wanted to see Kirill Kaprizov back sooner rather than later, that doesn't seem like it's going to happen. He hasn't played in a month since January 26th, had surgery. They thought he'd be out another 4 weeks. We're right around that timeline, but there is no timeline for his return right now, according to Sarah McClellan's story in the Star Tribune. The only sentence we have after that is the team still expects he will suit up at some point this season. That is not the optimistic update you want on your best player. How much time he's missed, how much they miss him. They've been doing a pretty good job of, weathering the storm, not getting way out of whack. They had a great comeback win the other night. They were down 3-1. Actually, the other day, I guess it was. They were down 3-1, came back to beat the Red Wings 4-3 in that game. But they are in a precarious position right now. It's hard for them to, A, keep this up, and B, to imagine any kind of postseason run without Kaprizov. So his status remains tenuous at best. No timeline for his return. That certainly bears watching as we consider the Wild's chances down the stretch. I want to talk today with Cassidy Hettesheimer from the Star Tribune, covers high school sports, in addition to other things as well. But this is the middle of state tournament season, Cassidy. So appreciate the time. And you just got done covering the girls' state hockey tournament, something I've covered many times, but a fun one at that.
Yeah, no, it was a good time. It's my first winter high school tournament season here in Minnesota in this role, and so this is my first time getting to cover really any state hockey tournament from Georgia. So that's not really something we have down there. So it was a blast. It was a lot of fun. We got some really good games, 2 finals, both going into overtime, which is the first year, I believe, that both of them in the same year have gone into overtime. So it was a good weekend of hockey.
They're all fun. I mean, I used to cover them back in like the late 90s, early 2000s, then again into the late 2000s, and, covering the games back at the State Fairgrounds, Coliseum, stuff like that. I'm aging myself right now. There's nothing better than playoff hockey, and we'll get back to the girls hockey state tournament in a minute here, but I want to first touch on a piece that you did, kind of a project you did that ran a couple weeks ago on just the best rivalries in high school sports in Minnesota. I want you to maybe kind of explain where the idea came from, how it came together before we get into the specifics of the 10 best that we identified.
No, I mean, this project kind of came about in conversations with Nick Williams, our prep sports team lead, and we were the Star Tribune has been pushing and to expand prep sports, and then also just with the general expansion that the paper has undergone recently and changing its name and becoming the Minnesota Star Tribune, finding ways to tell prep sports stories that kind of resonate with the state at large. And with high school sports, that's like a particularly tricky sort of balance, because even though we're really lucky to have a really robust prep sports team and have lots of reporters and editors who are contributing to sort of the goal there, there's always kind of the physical limitations of like we can't physically be at all of these games,
right?
Covering the results beyond what we can gather from talking to coaches on the phone and getting those scores. And so we've been kind of thinking about, how do you tell stories that touch on different areas and different schools, and either through, telling the story of one athlete or a team of athletes who, has some sort of emotional resonance beyond people who might be familiar with that school or familiar with that sport, or, finding ways to write stories, gather lists that sort of touch on different areas from, the Metro to the North Shore down to, southern Minnesota. And so, this kind of came about as one of those ideas, and as something that I could kind of, work on as someone new to the state. And we put out an all call in January, kind of asking people for their feedback and what they thought are the best rivalries, because I didn't feel like, coming in and being new to this role, I could, be the authoritative matter on that, even though I had some idea, just from my couple of months on the job of what might appear in my inbox. And we got a lot of really great responses. I think it was upwards of like 100 plus, and a bunch of different combinations of schools. And so I had a really good time reading through everybody's responses and seeing which ones were kind of duplicated a bunch, or people made really strong cases. And it was a really good time, and was interesting just as someone new to the area.
You said you're not surprised that Warroad versus Roseau hockey was the most submitted answer. I don't think anybody would be surprised by that. Was there anything just in that specific rivalry that stood out as unique to you, even if you knew a little bit about it going into it?
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely something that, like, either from the other prep sports reporters here or just, reading other coverage from other places, our coverage from the past, like, came up multiple times, just talking to people. So, yeah, I wasn't surprised to see that one hit my inbox. But I don't know. I guess in general, like, the thing to me that just is seems cool. And I know, like, obviously the New York Times and I think Sports Illustrated have gone out there to kind of document that rivalry. And I think, part of the draw is the idea that, like, this isn't, two schools that are in the middle of, like, a major sprawling metro area.
No.
It's these two schools that are kind of, far away from a lot of the rest of the state. And yet, the quality of these programs is still so high, and people are, there's like a willingness to make a trek, out to that, to see that, to cover that, which I think is cool and gives it, this interest beyond just like, oh yeah, these two schools smack dab in the middle of the, Twin Cities Metro, those are also on the list, but like, I don't know, I think it's unique.
I think it is too. I mean, having been witness to some of that, especially growing up. I mean, I grew up not too far from there in northern North Dakota. Some of these other ones, though, like you were quite prescient in noting Wayzata Hopkins basketball rivalry. That's been a great rivalry over the years. There was maybe a little bit too much of it a week or two ago with the boys game. But if those two teams play in a section final, girls or boys basketball, those are always intense. Those are always, those teams are usually good to great. Someone's going to get left behind. Like a lot of these are like good, both competitive and geographic rivalries.
Right. I think that obviously programs have their ups and downs, and, they're, and that was something too, as I was reporting this and reading different people's responses and kind of going back through old historical data, I kind of found a common theme in some of the responses of people saying like, well, this was a good rivalry.
Okay.
But, these teams aren't as strong as they were, or sections have changed, conferences have changed, so it's lost some of its edge. And so I think, in the article, I alluded to sort of like, this might not be the last people see of this sort of thing. And, if maybe around after state tournament season wraps up, if, there's time allows to kind of return to this, which I hope it does, like, I think that that's something that's interesting too, where, schools change, programs have ups and downs. And so there's kind of these older rivalries that maybe didn't make this list because I erred more towards current ongoing rivalries. But yeah, no, that was kind of an interesting thing too, as well, that was pointed out. And even when I put up the first call, I got a text from Patrick Royce and was like, here's my submission. And then he was like, you're probably going to get a lot of people saying this, that are all these small school rivalries, or rural areas that no longer exist. And I was like, okay, yeah, I did. And so he was very much correct.
But I mean, we got a lot of Minnesota represented. Obviously, the Warroad Roseau, Mankato East, Mankato West, Bemidji versus Brainerd in football. But then a lot of metro area stuff too. Edina versus Minnetonka. I mean, you hit a lot of the ones that I remember from more heavily covering preps, 15, 20 years ago. Breck Blake hockey is a great private school rivalry. The Hill Murray White Bear Lake hockey is a great public versus private school rivalry. So did anything like surprise you in all this, or that you either wasn't on your radar, or the passion about a specific rivalry was like, oh man, I didn't realize that, or how did that come about?
I think the thing, and you kind of alluded to this just now, but that surprised me or maybe was something that I was thinking about kind of in the construction of it, was the variety, I guess. I grew up going to like a big public high school in the Metro Atlanta area. And so our rival, which is kind of like the closest geographical school, my school is like 15 years old. So we didn't have much history, I guess, at the time, which, I know a lot of schools here have pretty long-standing history, and some of these rivalries stretch back to almost a century now. And so I think that something that was fun about it was, kind of that difference where it's not just, these two public schools are next to each other, or, these two private schools are this, but no, there's, private, public, there's public schools, there's, just a variety geographically and size wise of all these programs. And so, I think that was probably something that no two were alike. I guess it's cool.
Sometimes great battles in important games can spark a rivalry, and there was definitely some great games in the girls' hockey tournament that just concluded, if we might shift our attention to that. what was it like covering the first one? What did you make of the championship games? All that good stuff.
Yeah, so we were over at Excel Thursday through Saturday, a combination of me, our sports intern from Northwestern this quarter/semester. They're on quarter systems, but Alice Brown, who's been awesome, and then David Levick, who's the go-to hockey guy on Prep Sports, and so we were out there, and I'll shout out Jasmine Jackson, our new audience editor. If you've been seeing cool stuff on Instagram and stuff, that's all her. Posting, a lot of new prep sports stuff, which has been cool. She was out there too. But yeah, so we were out there, all 4 days, 1A quarters, 2A quarters, semifinals, final. It was a really good time. I mean, there was some upsets in the first round. Got to see number 7 Rosemount beat number 2 Centennial Spring Lake Park. And I mean, that was a really good team coming in, and they had some just a really dynamic front line, and Rosemount just did a good job just being physical and disrupting them. And that was a great game. And we saw Holy Family, who was making their debut at the state tournament, not just win their first game, but they held Edina to a 1-0 game in the semis. And so that was really cool. I was at their section final and watched them beat Minnetonka in overtime. So they were kind of riding some upsets, which is always a fun kind of momentum to have. But yeah, I mean, I think those are the championships that really stole the show. I mean, 2 back-to-back overtime games. And I think that maybe you can kind of have some, I don't know, the idea of both the 1A and 2A championships are rematches of last year's. Dodge County and Warroad in 1A, and Edina and Hill Murray in 2A. And I don't know, there's something about being nobody knew, but then the losers of last year's games won this one. So I think that's there were a lot of similarities, which I thought was interesting. But yeah,
those are always. I mean, this is kind of obviously the state tournament season kicks off a little bit sooner than girls hockey because we got the state skiing meet before that. But this one is at XL. This one feels okay. Now you're in for 4 or 5 weeks of just mayhem. We've got, next weekend is gymnastics and wrestling, if that's the same calendar that it used to go on, unless I'm wrong.
Gymnastics
or maybe it's
also this weekend. Yeah.
Oh, that's right. It was. Gymnastics already happened. My bad. Is it wrestling and swimming or at some point, and then boys hockey, and then girls basketball, boys basketball? They flip those around, but it's just chaos for the next, it's 6 weeks of wall to wall chaos when you're not covering the games, you're preparing for the next sport. We got people out at all these events. The section hockey is going to be terrific. Sometimes those are, I encourage you, if you're able to, get out to a section playoff, a section final boys hockey game, because sometimes those are even better than the state tournament games. You probably noticed that with the girls, because it's the chance to get there that means so much, not just the chance to win it all.
Mm-hmm. And these are teams that are playing each other every year.
Yes.
That's where some of the good rivalries tie back to that. Hill Murray, White Bear Lake, and hockey, Wayzata Hopkins basketball. It's that chance to kind of break into the wider state. Onto that stage that means so much, which I think is cool.
Unfortunately, everything happening at the X means that the Minnesota Frost barely ever gets to play there they played there in late January. Then they had a home game Sunday, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
And then their next home game isn't until another month from now in late March, once all the tournaments are done. Mm-hmm. You've covered a good deal of Frost games this year, and you keep track of them pretty well. Their season's kind of at a tough point in terms of both their schedule, and they've kind of hit a bump here in terms of their ability to win games. They've lost, I think, 4 of their last 5.
Yeah. Well, it's funny you mentioned them playing yesterday. I was looking at their attendance numbers. It was 8,770, and that was pretty comparable to the home opener, I believe. If that's me, recalling kind of off the dome. But I wonder, with all these away games, I'm does it make your home attendance better? For better or worse, everybody you have one game to get out to. But Yeah, no, it's definitely been kind of an up and down kind of last little stretch for them. They obviously, are defending champs, but last year didn't have too dissimilar of a journey where they kind of had some ups and downs and actually made it barely squeaked into the playoffs. So, it's not necessarily an unfamiliar spot that they've been in. Going into last night's game, they were tied for second with Toronto, and then this loss bumps them to third, gives Toronto second behind Montreal. But yeah, it's really just been an up and down period. They started off pretty strong, had some really good fast starts from some of their rookie draftees, Claire Thompson, Dominique Petrie, and then kind of had some injury troubles. Taylor Heisey was kind of, reigning playoff MVP, had a little bit slower start to her season, kind of working through a knee injury that she picked up in the rivalry series in November. And then Grace Zumwinkle, reigning Rookie of the Year, was out for a couple weeks on long-term injured reserve. And then Petrie, who had a really good start for them. So I think they didn't really suffer as much in the standings and results when they were out as like maybe, worst case scenario people might. And Sophie Jakes was out as well. Really, strong blue liner for them. So, but I think almost it's maybe one of those things, just hypothesizing kind of like from my coverage perspective, but it's kind of like, these players are out for a couple weeks. You kind of get into a groove of what things look like without them. Yeah. And find some way to succeed despite these really talented players being out. And then they come back. And then it's like, okay, how do we integrate everybody back into the line?
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
Get back into what our lines were. And so I don't know. I think between that and just kind of the ebb and flow of the season being what it is, maybe kind of could chalk up to some of that. But I think the big test will be they take like a month-long break in April after they'll have that home game and then have a pretty long stretch where they'll be out for the IIHF World Championships. And so last year, after coming back from that break, was, I think, the toughest stretch for them and kind of had them squeaking into the last year's playoffs. So I think that, like, we've seen, some breaks and then some slow starts getting back from the breaks. Like I think ideally you want it to not be in a place where you have to like come out of that break all cylinders. Cause I don't know, you don't know what that'll look like. Anybody will get injured at the World Championships, hopefully not, knock on wood. So yeah, I think that the couple games, if they can get some games on the road, this next month, it'll be good for them.
Well, and they're still, like you said, in third place, so it's not like the sky is falling. They're in good shape. Their record is 6-4-3-7. They give them a lot of different categories. It sounds like a bizarre baseball rundown when you're trying to figure out their where they're placed in the standings, but still in good shape and plenty of, like they showed last season. It doesn't always matter what you do during the regular season. They lost their last 5, then they lost their first 2 playoff games, and the next thing you know, they're champions. So plenty of time to pull it together, but you won't see them at home very often between late January and late March. If you missed it on Sunday, you missed it for that whole span, which is that's got to be hard for them to adjust to.
Yeah. No, it's a small league. It's 6 teams. Like the difference between, number 1 Montreal and last place, like, is not going to be as big as you might see between OKC and the Wizards or whatever. Yeah. And, like the Frost lost 8-3 to the last place Ottawa, averaging, the lowest goals per game, and then went and shut out number 1 Montreal on the road right after. So it is definitely like you just got to be above that line, fourth place to get into the playoffs. It's going to be the big thing.
It is. Cassidy, appreciate all of your time and insights on a variety of subjects today. Good luck with the rest of state tournament season. You got another month to go. Take a deep breath, take it all in, and enjoy it as best you can. And I'm sure we'll catch up down the road.
Yeah, I've got a trip planned home like the weekend or two after.
Yep, you got to get away after it. Yeah. I always remember the sweet relief of, it's a fun time, but the sweet relief of it when it's done.
Yeah, for sure. But it'll be good. I'm looking forward to the rest of it.
All right. Thanks, Cassidy. Bye-bye.
Yeah, of course.
Watch your dreams and savings grow with Royal Credit Union's 4.25% annual percentage yield 12-month certificate. Open now at any Royal office or online at rcu.org/certificate saver. Early withdrawal penalties could reduce earnings and principal. APY accurate as of 2/1/25. Insured by NCUA.
Great stuff from Cassidy. Good to have her on the show. Glad she could talk about so many. She's so versatile. Glad she could talk about so many different things. Catch us up on that great rivalries project she worked on. Catch us up on girls hockey state tournament and Minnesota Frost hockey. So great to have her on. I'm sure we'll be talking to her more in the coming weeks as the high school state tournaments ramp up even more. Let us finish with the cooler. Chris Paddack pitched 2 innings for the Twins on Monday, a game that officially it already didn't matter because it's an exhibition spring training game, one of their handful of first ones of the year. But then you get the additional rain out of the game. So all of a sudden you're talking about a game where not only is it not count, but they get shut down after a couple innings. But Paddack pitches 2 good innings, 1 run allowed. His stuff is good. Fastball hits 95. They're happy about that. Got me thinking about Chris Paddack's role on the Twins and what they have invested in Chris Paddack. You're talking about, is he going to get traded this offseason? He's going to make $7.5 million. He's already been on this team for 3 years. Remember, they traded for him right before the 2022 season, along with Emilio Pagan. Pagan was kind of a disaster that first year. He was better in 2023, but haven't really gotten much out of that whole trade. Chris Paddack has only pitched like 24 games for the Twins in 3 seasons because of a variety of injuries. They knew going in that he had 1 injury, but then he had to come back from it, and now trying to come back again and give them something this season. They gave up Taylor Rogers in that trade. Taylor Rogers had a pretty poor year in 2022, but he was okay in 2023 and really good for the Giants last season. Brent Rooker, they also gave up Brent Rooker in that trade. Brent Rooker, by the way, hit 39 home runs last season, had an OPS of like 900. So Chris Paddack is kind of the last vestige of trying to make sure this trade doesn't look like a complete disaster. They have invested a lot of time, not a lot of money yet. His contracts the first few years have only been like $2 million, but now $7.5 million. What is Chris Paddack at his best? His best year is probably his rookie season in 2019 when he gave San Diego a bunch of good innings. His ERA was like 3.3. Strikeouts were more than 1 per inning, more than 9 per 9 innings, things like that. So he was at his best, you would call him like a 3rd or 4th starter. If the Twins can get that kind of value out of him this season, I think they'll be happy. I think they would validate that. Would they still trade him at this point? Maybe. If he doesn't give them that, what kind of position will they be in? I don't know. I think their pitching depth is pretty good, like Royce and I talked about on Monday. They got some options here. I like David Festa. You had Simeon Woods-Richardson last year step up. You got Zebby Matthews in the pipeline. And then, of course, you've got your big 3 of Pablo Lopez, Joe Ryan, and Bailey Ober. But Chris Paddack is an important pitcher on this year's team, and the variance of what he could give you from getting shut down and not pitching at all to being a mid-rotation starter is a pretty big swing. So whatever they can get out of him, that was a positive sign on Monday, but still plenty of work to be done with Chris Paddack and to see if that trade from 2022 can still have some value. That will do it for me today. Like I said, Chris Hine talking Timberwolves on Wednesday's show. Big comeback that we talked about at the beginning of this show, plus looking ahead to the Lakers game, looking ahead to all sorts of stuff with Chris. So be sure to listen on Wednesday. Until then, I am Michael Rand. Have a great rest of your Tuesday. Back at it again tomorrow.